Hi everyone, it's Erin here. It is the middle of the night, so we're gonna be really quiet, and I think you might be witnessing my quarantine breakdown. That's right. This year, I decided, since we are all at home right now, we are going to plant a climate victory garden. I'm going to expand my garden. I'm going to grow food. It's great for the environment. It's great for our health, and it's a really great thing to do together as a family. So I waited all through March and all through April and through some really nice, beautiful days for gardening. And finally, the first week in May, I planted my garden. And here we are in the second week of May. I just got done from my run and I'm watching the news, and the weather person says, frost warning. Frost warning for the third night in a row, the second week of May. It was beautiful outside today. It was really warm. So I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around the fact that it's going to get cold enough overnight to potentially damage my plants. So here I go again for the third night in a row with my blankets. We're going to cover all of the produce that's growing there. And then first thing tomorrow morning, we're going to get up and we're going to do a little tour and see what happened back here overnight. You may be familiar with frost. It's when you come out on those cold spring mornings to surprisingly find this layer of cold, wet frost on your car. So let's go see how my garden survived overnight after a little frost. Some of the things that I'm noticing, you can see it does not look pretty. So I just covered my garden with some blankets and used some old wood to kind of hold down those blankets. And in some places I tied them to my garden stakes as well. So I'm feeling that this blanket's definitely wet. And then over here, come on over. There's also something else interesting. Here I used these plastic containers. And what do you see on this container? What do you see? It's water. That's really wet, lots of water. And then we're going to take a look at, this is my tomato plant. Now this tomato plant is looking a little worse for the wear. And this guy has survived now 3 nights of frost. And let's make some observations. What do you notice about this plant? Some of the things I'm noticing is I've got some brown here. It's very droopy. The leaves are really droopy. The stem looks pretty good. The stem looks healthy. It's green. It looks strong and standing up straight. It almost looks like the plant hasn't been watered. Do you think that this looks like it might even be a little bit dehydrated? That seems odd to me because there's all of this water that's on the edges of the plastic that was covering it. And the ground around this is really wet as well. But the plant looks pretty dry. Looks like what it looks like when you don't water your plants for a while. Here's another guy that has clearly suffered a little bit of damage too. This is a marigold, and I plant marigolds next to my tomatoes because they help keep pests away. They're really good to plant next to your tomatoes. Let's see how this guy did here. That's a little bit of lavender. And then this is some sage that has been here for, I think, 2 years now. So this guy's pretty well established. And what I'm noticing, he looks really good. I don't see anything on this plant here that looks damaged at all. Now I had a blanket covering the sage. Okay, let's see what else we can find. See what else we can uncover here. Now this guy, we double did this one. Oh, here's another tomato plant. And again, he looks a little bit better off than my first one. But are you seeing the same things that I'm seeing? Brown edges on the leaves. Looks a little dehydrated. Now, this is interesting here too. We've got a colorful blanket so you can actually see frost sitting on top of that blanket. Let's see what's underneath here. Well, that's a basil plant. Looks very similar to my tomato, right? Wow, he's got those dark brown spots, but some leaves look really good. Oh, there we go. This is my mystery plant. I did not plant this guy this year. He just kind of popped up, left over from last year. So I need to do my research and figure out what that is. If you know what this plant is, please email me and give me your identification. He looks pretty good though. Again, he's been in my garden for a year or so now, or at least I think so. He popped up this year. And here's another marigold that I planted. Again, looks really kind of dry and dehydrated. Why do we think that that's happening? Okay. Dry tomato plants. We're really hoping that these guys will bounce back a little bit. That the idea is maybe they suffered a little bit of damage in the frost. He looks really good. That marigold looks really good. Maybe they suffered a little damage in the frost, but hopefully with some TLC, they will bounce back and be ready for spring. And here's the rest of my garden that's been uncovered, and I'm starting to notice a theme. The plants that have been here for a year, like there's my little baby oregano, they look like they fared pretty well. But some of the plants that are newer, like the tomatoes and the marigolds, they look like they suffered a little bit of damage. So we'll see how this turns out. So based on our observations, we know that frost is sort of a form of water, right? When it melts and I touch it in the morning, it feels like droplets of water. And so we're going to think more about the stages of the water cycle and talk about them here so we can understand how frost forms. So my first phase is ice, which is freezing cold in my hand. And you could see when I spilled that out, what is dripping out as well. As that ice melts, you wind up with a liquid form, right? And that's called melting. And we get a liquid, which is water, which is really good to drink. Now, if I were to heat that water up, then we find something called evaporation. And evaporation takes this water and it starts to become a vapor. So it's a different stage of this water. And this is what we have here, this nice hot cup of water. I don't know if you can see the steam coming off of it from the camera there. And so this is hot steam. It's in the form of vapor. So if we were to change the temperature again, say, so on a cold night after the sun has gone down, you see this vapor that's in the air, and there's water particles that are in the air, moisture in the air. As that cools down, it now kind of transforms back into a liquid form. It's called condensation. You can see condensation everywhere. You see condensation on the edges of a cold soda on a hot day, and you can also see it in frost, because as that water vapor turns to liquid, if the temperature is below about 38, 32 is the actual freezing point, but when we get down about 38, then we start to see ice crystals that are forming, and that is the frost that you see on your car windows or on your plants. And we're going to take a look at my garden and what happened last night. Now, we have had 3 nights of frost in May, which is crazy. The last frost is really supposed to be around the end of April. So every night for the past 3 nights, I've been covering up all of my plants as I've been told. So that frost forms on top of the blanket instead of on top of the leaves of my plant. So let's go take a look and see what happened. So let's talk about these different processes that are happening here. The first is what we just described, which is actually the states of matter and the different forms that water can take. The first one is solid, which is ice. And then when ice melts, goes through the process called melting, it becomes a liquid, which is what you see in a glass of water when the ice is left behind. When that liquid is heated, it goes through a process called evaporation, which releases water vapor, which is the gaseous form of water, into the air. And that's what you see with the steam coming out of the hot mug there. The second thing we're going to talk about, and this relates directly to the frost that we're seeing, is the water cycle. And so in the water cycle, we've got a couple of things that are happening here. You've got heat coming from the sun, and that is heating water in the ocean, which goes through that process again of evaporation. And we see that there's water vapor in the air. And then this water vapor, when it comes together and it cools very quickly, it goes through a process of condensation. And when those clouds become full and the temperature then drops again, they go through the process of precipitation. And that's when you see things like rain and snow that are falling down from clouds in the sky. And then when we see frost, what happens is we've got water vapor in the air overnight. And when the temperature drops to a certain level, it's called the dew point. And the dew point actually changes that water vapor into a liquid form. And then on really cold nights, like we've seen, where it gets, into the low 30s, at least 32 degrees, that's where it freezes and it becomes a frost. So in looking at my garden, you could see that we had sort of mixed results. So some of my plants did really well. Some of those native plants that are well established did well. Some of them did have some brown on them, and they looked a little bit like they were dehydrated, like they needed to be watered. And I was wondering about this, so I figured I would consult with our expert on gardening at Riverbend, and that is Mike Barkus. He is our aquaponics specialist, and he takes care of our aquaponics greenhouse at Riverbend, which, by the way, we never have a frost inside the greenhouse, luckily, or haven't to date. But he also has a garden at home. So we're going to take a second and we're going to ask Mike, how does frost kill my plants? What happens there? Mike, can you answer that question?
Hey, Erin. Yeah, I see some of your plants look like they might have been damaged by the frost the other night. It's a pretty typical problem we have in Pennsylvania where we're growing when we get late frosts in the season. It was really cold the other day. So some of the plants that we normally plant, like tomatoes and peppers, what we call annual plants, as opposed to perennial plants that live around here and bloom every year. So annual plants like tomatoes and peppers that are really common and native to places like South America, where it's warm all the time, they don't really like it when it gets too cold. And you're exactly right. The plant looks like it's dehydrated. So what's happening there is the water from the cells inside the leaves is freezing, and it's hurting the cellular walls inside the plant leaf. So they're not able to drink the water. So really, they are dehydrated. Unfortunately, I don't think some of those tomato plants that you have are going to make it. I would recommend probably just getting some new tomato plants and putting them in now that we're past the frost date.
Thanks for that great information, Mike. So knowing all of this now, what are some things that maybe I could have done differently or I can do in the future to help protect my sensitive plants in the spring?
As a rule of thumb, going forward in the future, the best thing to do is to really wait until after Mother's Day to plant. That's a great indicator. It's usually the middle of May, and that's usually a time where we know we're not going to get any more frost after the middle of May. So usually wait. If you do plan ahead of time, you did exactly what the only thing you can do and the best thing to do. You cover your plants, you try to keep them warm and maybe protect them. Unfortunately, we had 3 days, 3 nights of freezing temperature. So it was really hard to keep them warm enough to survive. So unfortunately, I don't think some of those tomatoes are going to make it. But I'd leave them in and see what they do anyway. Maybe prune them back so they have a little more energy lower in the plant, and then see if they come back. Now, the things like basil, I think you had planted in your garden, you should be able to prune that, and it should be fine going forward. So I would continue with that and see how that goes.
So, Mike, you see that my garden is a raised bed garden. So, we bought the supplies and we built these boxes about 2 years ago. And we've gone through, this will be our, actually 3 years ago, this will be our third summer. And every year we've added an extra bed. And in the winter, we'll put compost down and I rake up all my leaves, I put them on the top, and I hear that that's really good to do in the winter. And what we found this spring is we had lots of worms in there. We know from our first video that worms are decomposers. They help to break down things like leaves and turn them into nutrients for soil. So I'm hoping we've got really good soil in there. Our new beds have just your standard soil that you would buy at a garden store. So it'll be interesting to compare how each bed does. Some other things that I've done, I planted marigolds next to my tomatoes because that's something, I don't know, my mom just always told me that it helps to protect the tomatoes against pests and they just really grow well together. I've heard, Mike, that you do a lot of this in your own garden, something that you call permaculture. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about that and share some, maybe a little bit about what's growing in your garden this season.
It's great to see your garden. It looks so good. And I love the fact that you're using raised beds also. I also use raised beds in my garden. I've got some raised beds you can see right there behind me. And it's a really great way to start a garden, especially when you don't have really good agricultural soil on your property. And it also helps protect your plants from animals coming, like rabbits just hopping over and eating stuff. So that's a good thing. I also love the fact that you're planting marigolds. So one of the reasons that we're planting marigolds by our crops is that they're going to attract pollinators. We need bees to come and little bugs to come and go into the flowers and pollinate all of our other flowers. Things like tomatoes that have flowers that need a bee to come and pollinate it and go from flower to flower. So we actually get a tomato. If we didn't have any pollinators, we wouldn't get any fruit off of our crops. So you also asked about permaculture. I designed my garden in a permaculture design. What is permaculture? Permaculture is really just a design science, a way that we can design a property that's a little more sustainable. So we're thinking about a lot of things that you're already thinking about. We're thinking about attracting more pollinators. We're thinking about really increasing the life on our property. We need to have as much life as possible, a lot of diversity in the plants that we grow, and a lot of focus on what's living under the soil. That's really one of the most important things, what's living in the soil. So that's where our plants are eating. All the plant roots are in the soil. They need to get all the nutrients from the soil, but what helps them do that? Beneficial microbes in the soil and all kinds of fungus and bacteria. And that's what's really important. We need to focus on that and build our good soil, and then we'll have really healthy plants. Now, again, you're planting marigolds, you're attracting pollinators. Those are annual plants, so they do self-seed and they'll come back every year. But you can also plant other flowering plants, like right beside me here. This is comfrey, and you can see these beautiful, beautiful flowers on this comfrey. So this is going to attract a lot of good pollinators to the garden. This is also going to be used, we can use all of these leaves as fertilizer. So we can actually put that in water and grind it up, and we can put it on our plants. We can let it ferment, all kinds of different things. We can also just cut this down and put it at the base of a plant and let it be and let it decompose into the ground, and then we'll have good fertilizer that way. So there's all kinds of great techniques. And if you look up permaculture, the word permaculture, you'll come across a lot of great definitions. There's a lot involved in permaculture design, and there's a lot to learn about it. But it's really a concept about creating a permanent culture, more of a permanent society. So it goes along with a lot of the things that we learn about and we teach about sustainability and being more sustainable. It's just a nice term to put it in a nice package and say, oh, it's permaculture. but it really is just very sustainable design, and a way to be a little more sustainable on your property. Hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Mike, for showing us your garden. It's so amazing. And I love to see how things change over the course of the season. You sent me a couple pictures just about a month ago, and it looked so different. I really look forward to hearing from you throughout the rest of the summer to see how things continue to change. And thank you for the tip. I promise next year I will wait just a little bit longer before I plant my annuals like my tomatoes and other really sensitive plants. So today we learned not only about some gardening and how we can be better gardeners, but a little bit about the water cycle and how frost forms and how the water cycle really has an impact on our gardening. So I have two things for you. If you could, I would love to see you draw your own diagrams of the water cycle and the states of water. You saw me draw that earlier. Send me your pictures about what you think the water cycle looks like, or the water cycle in your own backyard, or the trail or park, wherever it is that you spend time outside. And then also, if you're growing something outside in a pot, in a raised bed, or in the ground, please send me those pictures. I would love to see what things that you're starting to grow now that the weather is warming up. Thanks, everyone, and I'll see you next week.